Welcome to the Lost Vet podcast, where we are helping you to get back to your passion and purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Melodie Chan, and in today's episode of Destination People, Rob and I are going to dissect out the terms leadership versus management, because sometimes they're used interchangeably, but I think there's some important differences between the two that would be important to keep at the forefront of our mind. So have a listen. So I came across this page the other day, Rob, and it was actually talking about management versus leadership. And honestly, I don't know if I had ever really stopped to think about the difference. In the world where I came from, when I went into corporate, we'll talk about sort of people managers, but then sometimes they'll talk about people leaders. But then I also think about in veterinary clinics, we tend to think about just having a title of managers, right? Are you managing the veterinary, like who's the, are you managing the AHTs or the veterinary technologists? Are you managing the veterinary team, or who's managing the receptionists? Maybe let's try to pick that apart. Of in your mind, is there a difference between management and leadership?
Yeah, the slide you're talking about is actually one of the exercises we do on the Destination People program, and it's actually one of my favorite parts of the discussion because we do it quite early on. And I think many people have exactly the same thought process you do. Like the terms are used interchangeably,
Mm-hmm.
and if you were to be on LinkedIn for more than 20 minutes, it'd be hard to avoid a video somewhere talking about what great leadership is, but no one seems to be talking about great management. But then, like, it seems like what the job is to be a good manager or to manage the practice or to manage your customers. So the term manage seems to be the word we use on the ground, but leadership seems to be this aspirational thing up in the sky where we're these incredible kind of inspiring characters that can rally a group and lead by example and blah 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 blah. And
Yeah.
I find the term leadership and management that they do need explaining and they do need defining. So in the program we give the guys a chance to do that, where we discuss, well, what is it and how would you define it and what are the differences. And I think critically we don't have an answer for them as such. What we do is we just give them the opportunity to discuss it and find their own feet in what those
Okay.
areas are. I think it would be a reasonable observation to say that there's been a few books written about leadership, and there's also been some books written about management. And I think what I've observed is in the books I've read and the conversations I've had, it typically splits two ways, right? So management team seems to be the skill of managing tasks and processes and procedures and outcomes, right? So it seems to be quite a tangible, practical thing that you do. You manage a football team. You manage a team of people within a workplace. You manage a process, or you manage a program, and it all speaks really to what we've talked about in another episode about tasks. Right, a lot of management feels like it's preoccupied with getting the work done, whereas leadership seems to be this more kind of almost ethereal kind of notional thing where it's are we born leaders and what are the traits of great leadership, and we're preached to quite regularly about what that is. And I think there's a few little pieces within that that I could share with you to get your perspective, I guess, because I don't disagree with the term management. I don't disagree with the idea that management or being a manager is that, it's the coordination of tasks and process and procedures. I get that, feels right. With a leader, I think when I was trying to put together my first program on this about 15 years ago, maybe even longer than that, I was struggling with kind of the concept because I wrote in management or manager, I think I put into Google to see what it came back with, and the dictionary just said something like managing tasks and policies, whatever. But then when I typed in leader, it just said to lead, right? And I was like,
Very
oh,
specific. Very
really
specific.
helpful. Okay, thank you. Lead. Okay, good. Well, I better get started so I'm ahead of everyone. And it was so useless, that definition, that I kind of had to reframe the question, as you often do online. And I kind of like, well, what is leadership as opposed to what it is to lead? And that came up with some really interesting kind of definitions. And of course, being a dictionary definition, it wasn't preoccupied from a work context. It was more just, how do you define the term? So there's a couple of things which jumped out. One of them was to be a route or means of access, right, which I thought was a cool way of thinking about how we use leadership to allow other people to access something. So you're almost like the puncture point. You're the brake that allows other people through. So there's a few inferences there, right? There's the inference of being ahead and being in an advanced position. There's one about being the example, setting the tone, setting a standard, showing people what it is that you hope for from them. Not that they would carbon copy you, but just that they would see your traits, like integrity or honesty or whatever you think is important in your situation. But also, I love this idea of, it wasn't just about leading and breaking that wall in front of you, but also it was about being a route of access for other people, which I thought was kind of cool. It was this idea of not just being in the lead, but also about bringing people through as part of that process. And then there's another definition which said to mislead or deceive someone. So, as in, we have a phrase in England I grew up with, leading people down the garden path. I don't know if you can see what you can.
Yep.
Well, this idea that leadership isn't always a positive force, right? We all know that leadership isn't always bestowed on the greatest characters. Okay, so we've got lots of examples throughout human history, including right up to the modern day, of leaders which are ostensibly bad leaders. And they are leading, they're still leading really effectively, but in an incredibly negative, depending on your perception, of course, but an incredibly negative way, either in terms of the world situation or the country situation or whatever it might be. So I think sometimes we bestow positivity on leadership as though it's exclusively positive pursuit, but it isn't. It's, of course, it can be a really negative pursuit as well. Like, I'm sure anyone listening to this has ever been responsible for a group of people can think of people that they've worked with that have led the business in a negative way. And that term, one bad apple, it's never ceased to amaze me how much one person in an organization can upset an entire organization just by their presence. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean they're bad leaders. It's the opposite. It means they're brilliant leaders. If they're able to galvanize, pull together, create negative emotions and cultures within a business, that's very powerful. Because if you viewed that in the opposite, you'd be lauding them. You'd be saying, "Oh my God, look at all the good they're doing. Look how influential they are." Whereas we seem to ignore this idea of negative leadership. So I thought that was a really interesting way of positioning it, not just as this exclusively positive thing, but also it could be a force for bad as well, if misused. And then, of course, there's, I suppose, the final piece, which was this idea that you had to be in advance, or to be in the lead, right? And I kind of mentioned it in the first point, that there's definitely a narrative that says that the leader has to exemplify all the best traits of the human race, right? And you see them on LinkedIn at times, you see them on videos and all this kind of stuff. And I think when we think about leadership, I think when people are talking about it and we're thinking about it, it's like, that feels unachievable. Like, it's so far, this kind of, you need to just be authentic and honest and direct and kind and considerate. And it's like, oh my God, like, who is that person? Like, I don't know anybody like that. I know people that are like that sometimes in some situations, but I don't know anyone that's just that all the time. So this idea that somehow we can be this perfect leader it's a fallacy. And I think the minute we accept that it's impossible to be a perfect leader, then we actually might have a chance of being a good one. Because really, to me, when we think about leadership, it's more to do with the sentiment of that first definition, being a route and means of access. It's not just about you, it's about allowing people to come with you, encouraging people to come with you, them feeling that they want to come with you. And we've talked before, haven't we, about, trying to get people to do stuff. And how do I get this to happen? And how do we get that to happen? Whereas when you are a leader and when you are that example, but you are inclusive in the way that you're doing that, you want to bring people along for the ride too. You don't want this to be me, I'm the leader on a pedestal and look at you lot down there. You want this to be a collective effort. The greatest leaders I've ever worked with or see are the ones that people just like, they want to be with them. There's an aura. They want to be with their people want to be with them, not because they say cool things or do great feats of bravery or anything, just because of who they are as people, because they're interested in their people. They ask questions of the people that they work with. They want them to be successful. So if you like put those two positions in comparison of management, which is about tasks, and leadership, which is, it seems to be this kind of charismatic role, but I really want to kind of bring that definition back into what the tangible behaviors that we talk about with leadership. It's showing an interest and caring for the people that you have with you on the journey that you are on, and behaving in a way that you can be proud of. And that then has a really positive impact on the other people that are working with you. Now, I will, if you'll permit me, just add one further point. I read an article a few years ago in Harvard Business Review, and I thought it was a very interesting insight that I hadn't considered before. And it was talking about management specifically. And the question was, what is the most stressful kind of manager to work for, right? Or leader, I suppose you could position. And what was really interesting was that it wasn't the person, like the bad-tempered boss, right? It was, and it wasn't like, oh my God, they're too nice. I always feel like they're just trying to please me all the time and keep me happy, or they're always doing things for me and it feels wrong and disingenuous. The thing which people found most stressful was inconsistency. When they don't know what mood their leader or manager is going to show up in. And that speaks to a lot for me in all of this, because the challenge is for all of us in everything to be consistent, right? Habits, behaviors, going to the gym, eating well, being kind, being thoughtful, working hard. The consistency is the hard thing. It's not hard to do something well on a Wednesday, but can you do it for a year? And that's where I think about leadership or management, effective types of both. It's not that we show up for a week or show up, but if we keep showing up, and we keep doing the right things as to our moral compass, and we keep doing what we think is right for the future and for our people, over time, that's great leadership. But if you're just like a great leader on a Monday, but a terrible leader on a Wednesday, and then not bad again on Thursday, that is not what leadership is. There's a consistency about it where you always do the right things as much as possible, and hope that other people see that, and that in turn makes them want to do the right things with you as well. So that's my take on it anyway.
That's a very, very thorough and complete look at the two. I think for me, Rob, what stands out there is there's almost sort of two myths to debunk. The first one in my mind would be, that people are just born natural leaders. That, yeah, you can teach people how to manage because it's task oriented, it's organizing, it's structure. But to be a leader, you're born that way, which I 100% disagree. And I think this is really brought to light when you realize it's another skill. It's another thing that you can learn to be intentional about in just how you're going to think about working with the people around you. And I think the other myth to debunk is, again, just like you pointed out, when you think of leading or to lead, immediately the image that comes to mind is to be out in front, right? And I think that's just culturally, like that's how we've defined a leader to be. And I think for me, one of my big aha moments early on in my career, when I was still in veterinary practice, running my own business, I had been introduced to the concept of servant leadership. And that, I love that idea of being a leader means that you are a channel or a gateway. You are a bridge, you're a connector, because you're serving others to help them get from one place to the next place. And, in any direction. And so I love that idea that leadership isn't about being out in front all the time, because that's where you could fall into sometimes that poor leadership, as you described, because then it becomes a place coming from ego rather than trying to truly support and help others and inspire others to do whatever it is that they are wanting to do. And sometimes it's helping them to uncover what their hidden potential is, or what they didn't even realize they may be interested in. So I love that discussion.
I love that summary, and I think as well, just because actually I think you've summarised that brilliantly, better than I actually think I put it myself in the first place. And I love the way you talked about bridge and gate, like gateway. It's really cool. I like that. Um, but just one more thing sprung to mind, which was, I think sometimes we attribute like seniority to leadership, right? So we think about leadership as the boss or whoever's in charge or the vet in the practice or whoever the most senior person is, the practice manager. But really, leadership is a club for everyone. And if your contribution to running a successful veterinary practice is you keep that practice as clean as a nine pin, so that everyone is healthy and safe and the work can be done in a brilliant way, well, that's incredible leadership that you're showing in your role to do that consistently over time. The example that you set your colleagues about thoroughness and cleanliness and hygiene and professionalism and consistency, that is incredible leadership. And I think to mischaracterize it as something about seniority, I think takes away from people that do an incredible amount of good work in our businesses, that also lead in the way that they can, in the jobs that they have, in the roles that they have. So yeah, I love the way you describe that, and hopefully people listening have a different appreciation, at least hopefully better, but certainly different appreciation of what those two things are.
That's great. Thanks for your time as always, Rob. I always enjoy our catch-up sessions.
Thank you. Enjoyed it too.
I thought this was a really fun conversation, and piecing out the difference between management and leadership, and spending a little more time on leadership than maybe we even expected to when we started our conversation. If we think about management, again, it comes back to sort of the day-to-day things that you're trying to get done, whether it's yourself or the team, and what needs to be executed, and just managing a group of people, meaning that they're all sort of doing the things that need to get done. Versus we think about leadership as something maybe a little more challenging to achieve, because again, there's so many thoughts and ideas out there about what being a great leader is, that sometimes we can maybe feel discouraged that, oh, I could never be that person. I think if there's a piece of wisdom I could impart, is absolutely everybody can be a really great leader. It is a skill that can be learned. That was one that I took home personally when I took my first leadership session. I was so excited because I was thinking, this is just like a course that I can take to learn how to do surgery. And just realizing that there's actual skills that you can hone and develop. And I loved this concept that Rob defined a little more clearly, as the leader's not necessarily what we think about of someone being out in front all the time. In fact, we can be more effective as a leader if we're there as a conduit, as a bridge, as a supporter or a connector to help people get from one place to another. And it ties in with that concept of being a servant leader and helping those around you. I think the other piece, as he talked about, is consistency in being a leader, but also in your management style. If you're asking people to do things, that piece of consistency, I think, is also very much key. One thing I would often tell people that I was leading is to encourage them to lead from where they are, because you don't need to have the title, you don't need to have the seniority. You are absolutely a leader for everybody around you. And that consistency in behavior is so important, because you never know who is watching you. And so thinking about, even if you're outside walking your dog or you're outside with friends, there may be a little kid that's watching how you're carrying yourself, how you're interacting. And you never know what that small action that you think is insignificant can impact another person. So, thinking about that consistency and how you want others to treat you, is maybe even a really great way to think about leadership in that sense. Hopefully, you found this helpful, and we really enjoy sharing these ideas with you. Thanks for listening. Until next time.